This video is on the Technics SU-G700 integrated amp. This is actually its bigger brother, which inspired me to check it out. Audio Advice recently became a dealer for Technics, and their classic turntables have just been flying off our shelves. Technics of Japan has had a goal, though, to make some of the very best sounding audio gear you can find at any price. Throughout the years, Audio Advice has leaned more towards American or British audio companies, though, as most of our experience with very high-end models from other areas of the world has been pretty lackluster. One of our contacts at Technics is an old-school audiophile, and I got a call from him ranting and raving about a new integrated amplifier that had just come out. It's this one right here. The new integrated model, the SU-R1000, sells for about $10,000 and thus certainly falls in that category of very high-end gear not from the US or UK. Plus, it's a full digital amp to boot. Those two factors gave it 2 strikes against it, but I agreed to give it a try. In a few weeks, my sample arrived, and inside the box was a vinyl record, which had to be puzzled until I read the manual. The SU-R1000 is one beautiful and well-made piece of gear with its great-looking meters and thick metal chassis. It has a built-in phono preamp and very high-performance DAC for Toslink, coax, and USB inputs. The amp is full of tech, but the most 2 interesting aspects are how Technics wants to completely fine-tune the amp to both your speakers and phono cartridge. It has a special circuit called LAPC, which will play a long series of test tones through your speakers and adapt the amp to the characteristics of your speakers. To take that even further, you play the included test record, and after about 15 minutes, the phono preamp is perfectly adjusted to your cartridge. For those of you who like to tinker with cartridge loading, you'll be a little bit disappointed, but the phono preamp is really cool, and it comes with almost every historical EQ ever created, including the standard RAA, Decca, Columbia RCA, and many more. This is really great for old pressings done before RAA became the standard. After living with the SU-R1000 for about a week, I was just flat enamored at how good it sounded. This is not your typical digital amp. It has warmth, drive, and does an amazing job of capturing those subtle timing cues that pull you into the music. This experience led me to want to check out the much less expensive version, the SU-G700. And here it is. The SU-G700 does not look like your typical integrated amp. It's actually quite beautiful with its large meters and minimalistic front panel with a choice of black or silver. As you can see, the beautiful meters take center stage. The build level is impeccable with a fit and finish that is as well done as its bigger $10,000 brother. This is definitely not an amp you want to hide inside a cabinet. It should be proudly displayed. The speaker binding posts on the rear are very solid. Some amps in this price range give you balanced audio inputs, and the lack of these surprised me when their matching streaming music player, the SL-G700, does have balanced audio outs. Both the SU-R1000 and SU-G700 are based on the original reference amp and network preamp Technics introduced in 2014. These were a no-holds-barred effort to produce the best sound possible. Many of the technologies developed in these products trickle down into the SU-G700 and the new SU-R1000. The great news is that while the original pair sold for $26,000, the SU-G700 can be had for under $2,500. While $2,500 is surely in no way a bargain, the build and sound quality of this unit is exceptional. The SU-G700 has you very well covered on the inputs. You get 2 analog line level inputs, a moving magnet phono input, 2 coax digital, 2 Toslink, and a USB digital input. I like the preamp outs for adding a larger amp later, and the fact you can use it in a home theater system with a bypass input is really cool. For situations where you're getting acoustic feedback, you can engage a subsonic filter, a nice touch. And while not obvious until you get into the menu, there are tone controls of plus or minus 10 dB for bass, treble, and mid-range. These take a couple of steps to get to, though, as they're in the setup menu. I do like that Technics makes it clear in the display if tone controls are engaged with a big tone in the upper left-hand corner. Another interesting feature is their attenuator, which reminded me of a feature you see on some very high-performance audio research preamps. This applies primarily to the phono input, but does work across the other 2 analog inputs. It gives you 4 different gain settings to account for different outputs you get from the various moving magnet cartridges on the market. They are 0, 3, 6, and 10 dB in attenuation. The DACs in the SU-G700 support up to 384 32-bit and 11.2896 DSD. For headphone fans, you get a completely separate Class AA amp with separate circuits for voltage and current. I found it could easily drive any pair of harder to push headphones. I love to pop the cover of products to see the insides. I was very impressed with the inner workings of this amp. But the thing that really struck me was how well isolated each section was. Most brands put some effort into isolating the sections that could produce noise from the sensitive low-level circuits. But even an untrained eye can immediately see Technics took this to the extreme in these models. The SU-G700 is divided into 3 sections for the power supply, low level, and power amp section, with the low level on the opposite side of the chassis from the power supply. You will see big partitions to improve isolation, plus a super rigid chassis with a thick bottom plate and feet with isolation properties. The power supply section is even totally isolated in a separate box. The power supply is the part of an electronic component that supplies the power needed for all the electronic circuits. Throughout the history of high-performance audio, any brand trying to create a world-class product focus a lot of their attention on the power supply. If it adds noise to the signal, that's a big problem. Or if it cannot supply the exact waveform each stage is expected to see, that section will not perform at its peak. Technics developed what they call their high-speed silent hybrid power supply. The output of this design is extremely quiet and linear. Technics shows a cutaway of the inside in the documents, and you can see it is quite substantial. Of course, the proof is in the listing, and I can say the SU-G700 has a totally silent background. There's just no noise. The SU-G700 is a totally digital amp, and it's interesting how Technics use being all digital to their advantage. This new tech was first launched in their $17,000 SE-R1 power amp. The first is their Geno Engine, which stands for Jitter Elimination and Noise Shaping Optimization. If you read much about the disadvantages of digital, jitter always comes up as a bad word, and yes it is. Products with high jitter just don't sound natural. The Geno Engine eliminates all jitter to give you a sound that can reveal all the subtle nuances of the music. LAPC, or Load Adaptive Phase Calibration, is just super neat. All speakers present an ever-changing load to amplifiers based upon the frequency. This creates phase shifts and challenges for any power amp. With LAPC, you press and hold the button on the remote, and for a few minutes you'll hear a string of test tones, blips, and beeps coming from your speakers. The amp is actually adapting to your speakers through this process. From a technical standpoint, this is just a great idea and would be impossible to pull off were it not in the complete digital domain. Correcting for this should improve both bass and spatial cues. In my testing, the difference with LAPC was not subtle at all. The power rating on the SU-G700 is 70 watts per channel into 8 ohms and 140 watts per channel into 4 ohms. I wanted to see how the SU-G700 would do pushing moderately sensitive speakers, so I picked the Revel Performa F206. These have a sensitivity of 88 dB, which is in a range I consider not super sensitive. For a source, I used the companion SLG700, which by the way is an outstanding CD and SACD player, streamer, and DAC. First up was All or Nothing from Diana Krall's Love Scenes album. This cut starts out with an upright bass line that came across super clear and detailed with this combination. On a very good system, when Diana Krall starts singing, a great system will reveal tiny volume and tonal changes in her voice that make it sound more like she's in the room. I tried turning off LAPC during both the beginning and vocal section, and sure enough, the bass was more defined with it on, and I was able to hear those little subtle changes far better with it on as well. Next was Rehab from Amy Winehouse, Back to Black. This track can sound harsh on some systems, which is why I chose it to see how this amp would do here. I pushed the volume up a few notches to hear if things would get rough. While this was nowhere as polished a recording from an audiophile standpoint as the Diana Krall, it was involving and toe tapping with no sense of edge ever. Just what I wanted. Last up was Riding with the King from the 2000 release Riding with the King featuring Eric Clapton and B.B. King. This cut is full of energy and raunchy blues guitar riffs and just a ton of fun to listen to. I decided to make this my one torture test and really crank things up to see how soon the amp would run out of gas. The Rebels were able to blast out this great music with ease until I pushed things really hard. Yes, it did run out of gas, but at a very loud volume level. In all these tracks, I was struck by how effortless the sound emerged and all the little subtle changes I was able to detect. For the ultimate in rhythm and pacing, I would still give the edge to some of our more expensive amps from Name or Cambridge Audio and the bigger SUR1000, but this amp did very well for its price feature set. The integrated amp category is crowded for sure. There are a lot of great value amps out there at or around $1,000 that make great music with some decent feature sets. But this amp is different. It's just flat beautiful to look at with an appearance reminiscent of products from the glory days of audio in the 1970s. You get lots of inputs with a great headphone amp and tone controls to tame some of those old recordings that are great music but sound pretty rough. But the big deal is this LAPC circuitry. When you engage it, the system takes on a sense of effortlessness that just lets you hear really deep into tiny changes in the music. If you have speakers that are of moderate sensitivity in a medium to small room, its power will be plenty to make you happy. Technics has certainly turned the tables on what I have come to expect from all digital amplifiers. This amp is sweet and fun to listen to. If you have any questions about this great amp, or actually anything related to home theater or high performance audio, please reach out to us at audioadvice.com via phone, email, or chat, or you can visit one of our great stores. Thanks for watching.